Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today we are most excited to have back on this show Renee Starr, who is a multi-award winning author, wild witch, 9 moons lunar priestess, and artist. And today she's going to be sharing her wisdom about talismans and amulets. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our show. We're happy to have you guys here. We've got all kinds of great stuff coming up and planning in the works for May. We're going to hopefully have our next roundtable of magical people. So it's our 2-hour special that we do, and maybe we'll invite Renee back for that. That would be great to have her back. So we're looking forward to that. Next week is Spell It Out with Krista, and she's going to continue, I think, to do some stuff on tarot. So for all you tarot enthusiasts. You can get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And while you're there, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi. It helps us to cover some of our cost of doing the show. But we absolutely love doing it for you guys, and we love our fans. Please comment. And if you're on while we're doing the live stream, live chat, and we can answer your questions. And sign up for our newsletter on our website as well. And hit like and subscribe. That's one of the best things you can do to help us out if you really want to do that. And we appreciate that as well. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time because this is a great topic, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And welcome, Renee.
Hi, thank you.
So good to have you back.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
Now, I remember we talked a little bit about this topic, and I realized both the talismans and amulets are things that most magic people know about, but maybe not a lot about them. We know their importance in the sense that we use them, and certainly there are people that do know a lot, but I don't really. I mean, I when I think about it, I don't know much about the history. So I think it's really a great topic. So first of all, I would like to just have you explain the difference between the two.
Excellent. It's such a good question, too. And while they can be interchanged in a way, talismans traditionally are for any purpose. They can be made of paper, crystal, clay, any material, and for any purpose, whereas amulets were traditionally only for protection. And they were usually made as a jewelry charm or a bauble or something to be carried in a velvet bag or a little linen bag, something that was more jewelry-like. And so pendants have a relationship, like jewelry pendants have a relationship to amulets. And so they come together, talismans and amulets, and they also diverge, into different directions, and they have their own pathways. So when I work with them, I sometimes, in fact, let me back up a second. An amulet can also be something that you say. It can be like a spell charm that you say. So you make an amulet spell that you recite and you carry it with you, and that acts as the amulet as well.
And that's fascinating. I never knew that.
Spells, spell charm. So the word charm and amulet kind of hold hands because of the jewelry connection, but a spell is also a charm. And so it can be an amulet as well. And, the kind of magic that I practice isn't very regimented. I like to push the edge of envelopes. I like to explore, and I like to be eclectic and also create from tradition. So I like to mix it up a little bit. I don't, if someone says to me, that's not the right way to do that, I really can't handle that. I like to kind of break out of the boundaries and create magic that is very personal and very wild. So.
I was what was initially, I was attracted to at the time, I was attracted to formally working with the goddess and witchcraft, and I did it on my own. And I remember one of my rituals was I memorized one of Doreen Valente's poems and I would say it out loud every day. And that was, I just decided to do that. And she's got great poetry, you know, it was
Yeah.
her famous
That's a
one.
beautiful practice. And what you were doing is you turned her words into a spell or an invocation, and then you worked with them. And if you were working with a talisman, you might have written those words down and put symbols around them. And you might have activated your paper during a specific celestial event or moon phase, or associated it with a specific star or lunar mansion or a goddess or an angel, and then folded it up, put it in some little container, and carried it with you as a magical talisman.
Wow. Yeah, really, that appeals to me as a poet. I'd love that idea. And I definitely love magical poetry, especially when it's so well done. But even when it's simple, I like, it's the one time I like rhyming is with spells. I mean, because it helps you get into that state of mind and rhythm. It's easy to remember.
There's actually a scientific basis to that rhythmic rhyming for spell work. And it's not something I think the ancients were consciously aware of. But when I became a hypnotherapist, I learned that the subconscious mind, alliteration and poetry and rhyming appeals, it catches the attention of the subconscious. So when you're working that way, you can go quite trancy. So that, you know, that rhythm of poetry and that rhyming, your conscious mind gets very bored of it and your subconscious really comes forth.
Right.
So that's what you want. And that's a good thing.
Oh, I love that. Now let's talk a little bit about how far back all talismans and amulets go. I know that you would know this.
Thank you. Yes, you know my love of going back into time. I love finding the root and the origin of everything. I have this burning desire to go back in time and seek ancient wisdom. So to answer your question, talismans and amulets, I would say amulets go farther back because of their physical presence. You could hold them in your hand, you could make a piece of jewelry, you could make a charm, a fetish. And so they go back. We have discovered in Neolithic dig sites that we found tiny fetishes of goddess, of animals, of like a leg or an arm, things like that. So they were using fetish amulet and worshiping, and, you know, they imbued magical powers to them for protection. And you can see this in ancient, you know, Mexican and Aztec milagros as well. All those little body parts and the little, you know, anything you wanted, you got obtained a milagro for, and you imbued it with prayer. So it goes back, I would say, even pre-Neolithic to times when we don't have any, you know, we don't have any proof of that, but we see it in every single culture. And talismans had a rise in medieval times when the Magi traveled from Persia, and they went into, you know, one of their missions as Zoroastrians was to spread the magic and spread the wisdom of magical practice. So they went to the northern countries, Europe, the Nordic countries, Germanic countries, and they taught magical practice of astrology and herbalism and angelic connection. And paper talismans were made. Talismans made on sheepskin, you know, on parchment. And those are very powerful even today. Very powerful. A paper talisman, even if I do a quick one on a piece of note paper, if I infuse it and activate it properly, I have had them work so powerfully for me. Like almost it's my exclusive way of working magically is with talismans and amulets.
Now, when you go to make one, do you draw from a lot of different sources in terms of the symbols you use, or do you have favorite ones that you know tend to use a lot of? I'd be kind of curious to know how you work with it.
I think, you know, because we all have a gravitation towards a specific pantheon, a specific love of symbol. And if you love symbols, you love talismans and amulets. So for me, I tend to gravitate towards astrological, runic, and then anything like ancient symbols, so spiral, things like that. But I put a lot of astrological and runic symbols in my work. And then I also do the rune spells. So I, take several different runes, combine them, break them down, and create a new design so it's hidden. And I'm the only one who knows.
Ah.
This is important too. I never show my talismans or amulets to anyone. If I teach a course, I make one with them or show them how in person, but it's not a one that I'm going to really work with.
I learned that's true with at least the course I took with a Native American woman with shields. They'd never put their medicine in the front. It's always the real medicine. They decorate it, but that's not their medicine. They hide it from people. And I thought that was really interesting because it makes sense. Then it makes you less vulnerable.
And not only that, you don't want other eyes or other thoughts on your magic. So if you're making a spell jar, which is an amulet, by the way, a little spell vial is an amulet. If you're making something like that, you don't want other people looking at it, touching it, or putting their unconscious thoughts into it. And so you want to protect it. Usually you can use a black cloth or box or metal to hide it, or just hide it away, put it in a drawer, or some people wear mojo bags or medicine bags and they put everything in there, but you don't ever touch it. You can't look in it. It's very private.
And that's an interesting thing because of the phenomena on Instagram of people doing, we've talked about this on other shows, maybe not with you, but with Jackie, I think, Smith of Cover to Creations, about the public doing of magic and spells. And I could see if it was a community spell, like for the community, but people doing their private ones, it sort of seems to me ineffective. From what I knew of magic, I said, well, I think that you're opening up a door where it's making it harder for it to be effective. I
agree. And, this is where I toggle back and forth to pushing envelopes and innovating because I'm very creative and also following some very good traditions. So I like to, keep really solid, good traditions in place, but not make them a rule.
Right.
So it isn't a rule that you shouldn't show your magic. If you want your magic to be most potent, most effective, and most pure, you will not show it publicly. So I wonder, I've recently started watching Witch Talk just out of curiosity, and God bless, or Goddess bless as well. They're really excited about what they're doing, and I'm excited for them. And I wonder if what they're sharing is their actual magic.
Yeah, maybe not.
I don't know if it is.
There's like an act.
It's drama and theatrics on purpose and for a good reason to teach and share. I think that's phenomenal. But if I'm teaching or sharing my magic, that is not the talisman I'm actually going to use.
That's a good perception. I think that's probably quite possible for some of them. You're right. They're just showing what it could look like, and they're putting on an act, acting it out in a sense so that you can see what it's like.
Exactly. And in that way, this is probably the first time since the beginning of time that we can do magic publicly.
It's true. There are some countries it's still dangerous to be a witch. There's certain parts of Africa that you can still be burned and killed, even though they have a lot of witches. Yes. But you're right. It's I never thought of it quite like that, and it's safer and it's also popular in terms. It's not just the one witch in the village kind of.
Right, which would be me. It would be me living at the edge of the forest, which I kind of actually am. So.
So what about maybe giving us an example of a simple talisman a person can use, maybe something that would be connected to something relevant right now, something connected to healing maybe would be good, or prosperity, or wanting, I get people asking a lot, am I on the right path? That would be an interesting talisman or something like that. So maybe you can give an example.
Yeah, that one, I wouldn't say that would be simple. I would say that would be an astrological endeavor, because you would really want to go into the birth chart and then support what the possibilities are for that person's purpose and working with them. However, that being said, if I were having a consultation with someone to create something, and by the way, I don't create magic for people. I create the tools or offer the tools or teach the tools for them to do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if I make a talisman for you, you would have to activate it yourself, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But so if someone were looking for life purpose, I would go into their sun and ascendant signs. And I would work with those two symbols because the sun is who you are in life in public, and your ascendant is your destiny, who you're designed to be. And then you could even throw your moon sign in there because those are your deepest, most intuitive and hidden dreams and intuitions. So I would work with those three. That's the triplicity of astrology. When you work with those three, you're working with the essence of your birth chart. So that is where I would go. And then you might want to put a symbol of something that's very important to you. Maybe you like runes. Maybe you like the Hebrew letters. Maybe, there's another symbology, a system of symbolism that you enjoy.
Now, would you say, if you're like into the tarot, you could use a card itself magically as a talisman and somehow do more with it than decorate it or
They are talismans. They are already talismans inactive until you activate them. So before you shuffle, before you choose, all those talismans are sitting there waiting. And the moment you choose them, they begin to work with you and for you. So yes, I've actually done spell work with tarot cards, and I've used them as amulets and talismans.
Boy, those little tiny decks would be perfect if you wanted something small.
Yes, very much so. And that's this is where the talisman and amulet come together, because you can put a talisman in a locket. And the locket is your amulet, and your talisman is hiding within it. I'm in process right now with a jeweler, a fantastically mystical and magical jeweler, and I'm having a witch ring designed, and I'm going to put a spell that has been a talisman and a spell that I've burned, and put the ash underneath the gemstone.
Ooh, that's interesting. I love that.
Yeah, I know, very interesting.
So that gets into the idea of having some talismans that might be more permanent than others in terms of like keeping them.
You can have permanent talismans. I find that they do have a lifespan. It depends on what the purpose of them is. As an example, my amulets, my Hamsa, I'm very, very connected to the Hamsa. And my Hamsa amulets, which some of them I could put talismanic magic in them by putting little slips of paper or ash inside of one if I wanted. But those are forever for me. They may need a recharge every now and then, but they don't stop working unless the purpose I have set for them is no longer needed.
Interesting. So I'm going to go back to the Hamsa thing in a minute too. So how do you know when first of all, when the talisman is no longer working, and what do you do with it after it's done? How do you dispose of it magically? Because I've had this conversation of how to dispose of magical things, and it's a little more complicated than, like, I don't want to pollute, and I don't want to just throw things in the garbage though. So
right. Well, it's a really excellent question, and there's many different answers for different circumstances. So we'll go into the basic. How do you know? You go through a process to activate your talisman. You bless it, you activate it, and then you put it, in a container to carry with you, or even your amulet or your talisman. And you can feel it. You can feel its energy. You can feel it working in your life. Synchronicities will come forth. You'll start to understand, oh, wow, this is coming from my talismanic work, or my amulet's working for me. You can feel it. And then you don't feel it anymore. So you can also specify a time. I'm going to use this for one full moon phase. And at the end of the moon cycle, at the end of the cycle, you're done. You've set that parameter. But if you're leaving one open-ended, like I have some right now, that the window for them, I felt it close a couple of months ago. And so I'm getting ready to let them go. You can just feel it. You get into relationship with your talismans and amulets, and you should be in relationship with them. You should touch them often. You have to forget about their working. You have to let them work, but you want to kind of touch it, remember where it is, say hello, get into relationship with it. And as far as letting them go, if your talisman or your amulet is complete and you'll never use it again, like you're not going to restart it for anything, then you should either put into the ocean safely without creating pollution, or burn if possible.
That would work with the paper ones.
I usually burn paper.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering then, I wonder if that would be, I have a bay leaf I've been using and carrying it around for a specific property, but now it has a hole in it. And I can't decide if I should keep it or burn it. I'm at that and put another one in. I think probably burning it when it's done would be the best thing, is what I can tell.
Or because it's plant material, it's of the earth. So you could also crumble it into the dirt or sand, and it's just as destroyed. And then you also want to let your talisman or amulet know during a ritual that you're done. You're releasing it. So in my course, I actually have a spell charm to release or retire, either of those. Oh. And you can retire. I don't retire talismans, I destroy them at the end. But with an amulet, you can retire it until further notice or forever.
It can go to sleep for a while.
It can go to sleep. What you do is you remove the intention and the magic from it. You create a blank slate and you let it know that it is now free of purpose and awaits your next purpose.
Now, I wanted to go back to the hamsa, and I don't know the formal name for the symbol against the evil eye. I looked it up once. There's a name for it, like the single blue eye.
Oh, that in Greek, I can't remember what the name of that is. I know what you're speaking.
It does. No one mentions it. And I didn't even know until I was researching. Said, "Oh, it has a name. That's cool." Well, I love both those symbols enormously. But the time that I bought this hamsa from this fellow, used to be on the beach, and he came from Turkey, and he'd have these beautiful ceramic ones. But it was the way they were. This rope that they braided on was really good. It was like you could see someone put a lot of energy, and it was not expensive. So I'd always go and buy them there. But the first time I bought it, I think I bought it more for decoration, and I put it on my front door in our apartment. And I didn't do any magic with it. I just thought, how beautiful is this? And I know you can put it in your front door. And that weekend, our business went insane. And I realized, like, oh my God, we needed some help.
Which direction was the hand pointing?
Well, it was facing out towards the east.
No, down.
Up.
Okay.
It was up. It's still up. I left it there.
Yes, and it's very interesting. So there's an awful lot. We spoke, you and I, before the show about my heritage, my secret Persian heritage, which came forth after my parents passed, and all of a sudden we now learn that we're Persian. But I connected to the Hamsa before I knew that, and hadn't really worked with it. And then recently, in the last few years, it has come forth for me. I'm actually writing a book called Hamsa Magic, and it's come forth for me as one of my most precious amulets and talismans. You can, combine the two. It is so powerful, and I've done a great deal of meditation with it. And what I have learned is that it goes back to ancient Egypt, when there was a hand symbol, and they would have the hand with the two fingers and the thumb, and that was brought into Christianity. You'll see Jesus with that symbol.
Right.
And that was Isis, Osiris, and Horus. So it was Isis, Osiris, and Horus. And so that was a symbol, an amulet protection. And it evolved into different cultures as the Hamsa. And the Hamsa is the hand of the goddess and the eye of God.
I love that. We'll have you back on, because it's definitely, I am just always drawn to its beauty. I use it, I buy things all the time, but also other people notice it a lot. I had this like $20 fringe little purse with the hamsa on it, and it's really cheap looking in some ways. And everyone always notices, and now it's really beat up even, and I can't find it again because I don't want to spend a lot of money. It's a fake leather. It's not, right. But I mean, it was. I just love the hamps on it, and I have always meant to do more research, but I always trust my instincts about what I'm drawn to, whatever crystal, whatever. That has always, to me, been my starting point with any object, is like trusting that. And then you can do the research and all of that. But I find if I try to approach it intellectually, it's not the same for me. And that's just how I operate.
Yes. What will happen is an amulet will attract you. It will call to you. And then you'll start working with it. And then you'll start seeing its effect in your life. And if you're interested, you'll find you have an invitation to study it and to research it, and you learn more. And that's what happened with the Hamsa. And when the Hamsa is facing up, when fingers are facing up, that is protection. So stop.
Right.
And when fingers are facing down, it's a blessing of abundance and health and wealth. So you're drawing upon the earth's abundance and strength and bringing it up into your life.
It's interesting. So, you don't see that one as much.
You don't. It's very difficult to find. And so you have to really, I'm actually in process of creating them. I'm really just diving deep into it as an amulet. And then the talisman aspect of it comes when you can inscribe specific charms into the Hamsa, and then it becomes a talisman and amulet together.
That seems really cool if you can do that. I mean, obviously it's a nice balance between the two.
And that, that practice, we find that way back in ancient Semitic cultures with incantation bowls. And so at the door of most ancient Semitic homes was an incantation bowl, usually to capture demons before they came into the house.
Oh my goodness. So what do you do once you capture them?
You break the bowl.
Oh, wow.
They're in the bowl. You break it. They can't get out. They have no way. So the spell starts on the rim and goes all the way around to the center. So what happens is the demon gets caught on the rim and is drawn into the bowl. So in my book, I rewrote an incantation against Lilith, and I made it an invocation and blessing, because it came from an incantation bowl that was used to keep her from your home.
Yeah, and Lilith gets a very bad rap.
Really does. Like, that's a whole show in itself.
I should send you maybe some of the poems I read. I learned about Lilith from this woman, a poet, Enid Dame, in New York, and she had written a whole book, a small book of poetry in support of Lilith, and they're really wonderful poems. And I'd never known anything about Lilith until I heard these poems. Beautiful. And I have it still, and I really, really appreciate that. And they're very well done too, and it just totally opened the door to Lilith to me, and at a time I wasn't even looking. And unfortunately, that's true, of the goddesses in general. That having said that, having worked with some goddesses that are intense, it doesn't mean I'm going to take the intensity of certain goddesses for granted. I'm not going to just suddenly feel like, it's just Lilith. It
won't let you do that anyway.
No, exactly. But
I think Kali.
Well, I think it's getting better, the balance of how people see from when I first was studying the goddess. It's getting better. There have been places that have kept it intact, like Tara. The 21 aspects of Tara. You just look at what some of the things she does and her imagery. That's one of the reasons I like Tara. She never lost all of the dimensions. They're all there. They're not hidden. Now there's so many different texts though. When I started to do research, I was completely overwhelmed. I had to even figure out, was this the one red Tara or is that the one red Tara? The names but I was impressed that somehow she's managed to maintain all of the dimensions of the feminine.
Yes, very much so. It's a blessing.
Yeah.
And most of the goddess work and goddess devotion, I'm finding the more I work with goddess, the more I find she has that Bindu point that point of origin, and she expresses herself in all the personifications. So you'll always find her somehow,
Right.
in some way.
That's true. She'll lead you there.
Yep, she will.
Well, let's talk a little bit about using either the amulet or talisman around a specific goddess, and how does that work? I'm sure that's something that you have done and shown people how to do.
So you can do it in several different ways. You can get an amulet in the likeness of your goddess. So you could get a charm or a pendant, or even a small statue or a large statue of, let's say, you want to work with Lilith, you'll get a little statue of her. Or you can work with the ancient Egyptians. Then I have one. It's just absolutely stunning. It's a flat clay disc with the image of the goddess on it in raised, almost like a bas relief. And so her face, I have one for Hathor, and they would carry these clay discs with them, and they would infuse them with magic and incantation and petition, prayer and petition. And when you're working with goddess, you really want her to come assist, be with you, infuse her wisdom and guidance and power into your life and guide you. So that's how I would work with them. You can also make a paper talisman for them too. You can write her name in, there's very specific ways to create sigils, and you can create a sigil of her name and your petition, your request, what you would like, your intention. And then you put that on the paper, and you can draw her symbolism. You can use her colors. You can put her dried plant material that is associated with her, or if she has other kind of material, like let's say you're working with a goddess who works with owl feather. If you have owl feather, you can wrap that talisman around the feather. And you can bind it. And there's also binding of the talisman and sacred words and sigils. There's so much. I mean, that's why I love it, because even if I'm doing candle magic, I can bring a talisman or an amulet into it.
Yeah, it seems very versatile.
Very, very. It is both.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It's both its own magic, and it is complementary and supportive and empowering of all other magic.
One of the things I like about the Tibetan Buddhist teachers I have always met is you can take objects in to bless them. And they do some things differently. Like I took my green Tara statue to this one teacher, and I hadn't gotten the green Tara for some reason. I had the white Tara, and so I got the empowerment. And he also gave me a little piece of paper to put underneath the statue. And I've never opened it.
That's your talisman.
Yeah, and I realized when you were saying, "Oh my God," and I've never had that happen before, but that's the way he worked. They're all a little different, and you can bring you can bring rings or anything. But that was really cool that he said, just keep this with the statue. So I put it underneath it, and I put it in a case where I wouldn't, dust and throw it away. But now I didn't know that until we talked today.
I love that. And if you look in Judaism, you know the mezuzah, which goes on the doorway. Inside the mezuzah, now the mezuzah is the amulet, very decorative or sometimes very plain. And inside of it is a tiny scroll that has been handwritten by a very specific particular rabbi. And it is a talisman of protection and blessing. And it's, thousands of years old as a practice.
I didn't know that. That's really beautiful. I love things like that.
I do too.
So now what happens if you find, let's say you like antiques and you find something that seems like an amulet or talisman? How do you approach it? Yeah, like you to do, do you try, is there some way you can cleanse it? Do you accept it the way it is?
You can do both. I have accepted items in that I feel are very clear and have not been really worked with or touched or infused. And then you can also, as a general rule, cleanse and clear. I do know people who have brought antiques into their home and have experienced hauntings from them because there's attachments of spirit to them. But jewelry and things like that, you can kind of sense or feel. And if you're not sensitive to it, you can ask someone. Or, as I said, as a general rule, cleanse and clear. Use dried plant material or incense that you can burn, or the flame of a candle that you can pass it through, or rose water or rose hydrosol.
Rose hydrosol?
Hydrosol.
Hydrosol. Okay,
Yeah.
it's rose. It's like rose water, or is it a?
Like rose water. Hydrosol is the byproduct of essential oil production.
Mm-hmm.
So it contains microscopic particulates of the essential oil, but it's not, you can't, like, you don't feel the oil. It just feels like water, but the scent is exquisite.
I never heard that. I remember you've done a lot with aromatherapy, and you've made your own perfumes, anointing. Yes. Yeah. I remember the rose I got was incredible.
Yeah, I know. You talk about that. I love that.
I still remember it. I don't know. It really struck me. I don't know. There was something so potent, and the smell was just exquisite. So I always thought, wow, you have such a talent in that area.
Thank you. Anointing is very precious to me, and working with the scent is very sacred.
Well, scent is interesting. I was talking to smell with a friend of mine recently, and how of all the ways memory comes back, it's one of the most surprising, because you can be walking down the street somewhere and you smell something you're not prepared to smell, and suddenly you're flooded with the memory connected somehow to it. And I know they've proven that scientifically, but I'm always really amazed at what it releases in the mind, scent.
Well, when you study aromatherapy, you can find the science behind why it actually works, and it's quite fascinating. Briefly, there's an opening at the top of your nasal passages that actually there's a lobe of your brain that is exposed and sitting there without bone covering it.
Oh.
And it is directly related to the limbic system, which is memory and emotions and recall. So it's very powerful.
Oh, I didn't know there was a part of the brain there.
Yep.
Oh, that's amazing.
You don't want to go poking up too high.
No, I can see why now. And they had to do that for the COVID test.
That's why I was scared of the COVID test for that reason. I was like, whoa, don't go too high. You're going to give me a lobotomy.
Now, have you ever found, when you're working personally with a talisman, that you see that something, or an amulet, I would say maybe a talisman first, you see something like on the street or symbol of it? You were talking about synchronicity to kind of, show where you're at with the process. You feel like it's connected to the working.
Yeah, I do. It happens a lot with runes for me, because nature, and I've done a lot of research of where the runes have come from and their influence throughout history and different cultures, and they are everywhere. And nature can mimic or inspire the shapes of the runes very easily. So if I work deeply with the rune, I sometimes see it in a twig. Or a bunch of leaves that fell and some twigs, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Berkana. How did that happen? And so it's really powerful when you see that, but also the symbolism behind. So if, like, let's say I'm working with Aries and I'm working with the moon, and then I get a lot of synchronicities about lunar dreaming, etc., and fire and action for Aries. So there's a lot of nuance that if you're sensitive to it, you can really start to see how it's working in your life.
Yeah, I find the way lately I've been really connecting to the spirit world is through, if I immerse myself in someone's work who has died and I really love it, they start coming into my life in really odd, tangible ways. And the most interesting thing recently was I've been reading this incredible biography of Sylvia Plath, and her father was a beekeeper, and he had some sort of famous, or at the time respected, treatise on bees. And when I started reading this book, I started having strange encounters with bees. The weirdest was there was a swarm above my bike when I went to Ralph's. I was like, what in the world is going on? I mean, I'm still trying to figure that one out, because it was, she learned beekeeping, and she has a whole series of poems about bees. But I think it's because I was so immersed in this book. And I really, and I find that's a way to connect to the spirit world. That's not that hard. I mean, you have to really lose yourself in whatever that period is. Like I bet if you've been researching, you must feel that way sometimes. You research a period.
Tremendously.
And you evoke it into today's world. And it's I think everybody could do that, honestly.
Well, if you think about the way we research online, we talk about, sorry, I have to elevator down for the dog. If you look at the way we research online, we fall into rabbit holes. And so that is also magic. If you tug on the thread, so to speak, of working with plants, you find that you're also working with the elements, and you're also working with astrology, and you're also working with the stars and the planets and the seasons. So you tug on one tiny thread and you'll find yourself down a rabbit hole, and then all of creation is speaking to you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where synchronicity is most potent, is that it's a conversation.
I think so. And that's the one thing I like to tell people a lot, is that the universe, however way you believe, if there's God or not, is awake. And it does want to and will converse with you in your own language. So you're going to see symbols that you understand and that relate to you. So I find cards, playing cards and all things, because I'm a tarot card reader. It speaks in my symbolic language. And now and then, like, it will introduce something new, like the bees were a little bit new in that I don't usually think a lot of the bees. But you're right. And it is kind of like a rabbit hole. But I think for me, with researching, I feel it's really powerful. And you do this too, because you spend time in nature, that you spend time in the real world, what I call the real world, the physical world, versus the virtual world, which can captivate you too much, like, and you get too mental, and at least I do. I feel like this giant head just walking around, and where's the rest of my body?
The internet is a form of enchantment. So we fall into an enchantment with it, then the outer world, the physical world, drops away. So it's really important, and that this is important in magic. So you can become enchanted by your own magic and forget how to work it in the real world, in the physical realm. So when you're writing a talisman, you are in between. You are working in between, the liminal space of what is physical and what is non-physical, what is mundane and what is sacred. You're in a place of power, liminal power. And that's very important. So I don't just sit down and say, oh, I'm going to write a talisman right now. No, unless it's an emergency and I have to do something. And I might even draw a hamsa on my skin for protection or something. And by the way, you can put talismans and amulets on your skin. You can draw them. It's very powerful. But when you're working in that space, it's good to straddle one foot in the physical and one foot in the non-physical. And remember that we are beings of the middle. We are here in the middle realm. Earth is middle. There's the below and the above. And then here we are in the middle, where the two converge. That's the power that you're tapping into when you work magically with physical objects. So
I love that what you said about the internet being an enchantment. That is really a wonderful way to see it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm enchanted several times a day for many hours. Yeah, it is.
I love that.
Yeah, and it gives you permission to dive in, because it is our modern day apprenticeship with magic and information. Mm-hmm. And here it is, magically beamed out of where, I don't even know. Like, I don't even understand, honestly, how the internet works. It just boggles me, but it's so magical.
Yeah, I always think sometimes of all the images we post and put up every day, the millions and millions, and think about, where are they?
In space.
Yeah.
They are transmitted electronically and electrically in space. They're hanging out there in a liminal place.
Oh, it truly is our modern day magic, for sure.
Yep.
And I think it has its own rules and laws, some of which are probably connected to the ancient world, and some of them, it's a new territory in some ways, the Wild West.
I agree 100%.
So I did want to mention, we still have, plenty of time, but I did want to mention to people that you're actually teaching a course on this right now, and maybe talk about that a little bit, and also when it is.
Yes, it's we've just about to finish our first in the series of 4. And if people want to visit my website, which is goddesspriestesswitch.com, you'll see a tab called Offerings. And that is where the second course is launching now. Enrollment is open until the 7th. And it's a 4 course series that takes you from the very beginning of what are talismans and amulets and what would you possibly want to do with them, and brings you into 3 other of my favorite realms. So moon and star, goddess and angels, and then bindings of how to bind, them and keep them safe and protected while you're working with them. So the next up is moon and stars. And then after each one finishes, after each of the modules finish, the lessons entirely are available for purchase.
That's so people can go back and get the first round that missed it. And is it important that they do? Will they understand if they just...
It's best if you do the series.
Okay.
You could just jump into any of them. They're almost standalone, but it's really good that you at least get the first one.
Cool. Now, I did want to ask you, from your experience, it seems to me, and again, maybe this just is maybe a cursory look at things. It seems like people often want more protective objects, or at least they talk about more. If you go where, even in person, you'll talk about. And do you think there's a reason for that? And do you think there's any out of balance with that? What is your thoughts about that?
Such a good question. And Krista, if we turned the clock back to, Neolithic times, we would find the same desire from people wanting to feel protected. Because I think there is, and this is going to go a little esoterical for a moment, I feel with all of my heart that there is something within us that is aware on a very primitive, deep level that we are fragile, that we have lost connection, first of all, with the fact that we are all connected and we are connected to nature as a whole, and we feel very separate. And so we feel this fragility that causes us to imagine we need protection. And the imagination of that is, I believe, brings us back to source. So when we ask for protection, we're asking something bigger, more powerful outside of us to protect us, to guide us, to lead us. And that brings us back into connection. That brings us back into, we are part of the whole. There is something out there that will protect me. I am protected. So that we're off kilter thinking that we're separate and vulnerable and fragile. And yet when we seek protection, we are now weaving ourselves back into that fabric of all together, all one thing, all connected.
Yeah, I like that. I definitely like that perspective and how it brings you into the connection in a sense. So it doesn't really matter that that's what, pulls you in.
It's the human condition. We don't know. We are human here now, and our spirit, we get these glimpses of what we were, what we could be later. We were talking earlier about, do we continue on? That's the big question. Where do I go? Where did I come from? Who am I? What am I? Some of those are pretty burning questions for some of us. And when you work magically with protection, you're asking to tap into that. You're asking to tap into that thing that is outside of you that you can't name, that you don't know. Is it goddess, God, the elements, the earth, the cosmos, the creator, the mystery, all of those things? We're tapping into that. We're making connection with it.
I'm kind of curious if there could be a way to use a talisman with the philosophical questions. I don't know if there is. It's more if a person wants to wrestle with the question of life after death or reincarnation or I know, usually, and again, maybe it's just because popular magic is more, and there's nothing, I do prosperity spells and things, but you wonder, usually you see the more esoteric with more of the Western magical tradition. Right. But why, I would think you could do that with talismans too.
I would do that more with an amulet. And here's why. And you could use a talisman to empower the amulet. So you could put your symbolism on paper, and then you could, wrap the talisman or the amulet, or infuse the amulet during a specific celestial event to empower it. But I would work with an amulet. So as an example, the Ankh. It's a symbol of everlasting life. Those who wore it could touch it, hold it, and connect with that wisdom and truth. The symbol of Ma'at. If you wore a charm of Ma'at, you could touch it and you could look at it and you could know that her wisdom and truth were with you. You can tap into that. The Christian cross, a Catholic cross rather, that's an amulet that you can touch and hold and look at. The rosary, all of those things lead you to whatever you're seeking, whatever the purpose of them are. So if you're looking, like give me an example of something that you would want to seek.
Oh, what would I want to seek? Huh? I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm feeling more connected to what my purpose is right now, but I'm still sort of, that's on my mind. Am I now on my, because I don't know if purpose changes, but it certainly did for me. So I've been working more with what is my true purpose for quite some time, for many years, actually.
I would recommend working with a goddess, a wisdom goddess, or a goddess of truth. So again, Ma'at, you could work with Sophia. You could work with, we think, Athena. Any of those goddesses of power and purpose. And you could work with them symbolically as a piece of jewelry. You could write them out on a talisman and seek that guidance from them.
I've always been attracted to Ma'at because I heard or read Aleister Crowley said that at some point there would be the Aeon of Ma'at, the Aeon of Truth. And I remember thinking, like, that's where I belong.
Yes.
And that was it. And I said, oh, I gotta explore that someday. And maybe that's the time is now, because I often find in this culture, and I'm not Aquarius, but I have Aquarius ascendant and I have an Aquarius father, that I don't feel I fit in. I either go back into the late 1800s, which I really like the esoteric work there, or I feel like I belong in the future somewhere. I feel sort of in and I'm okay with it. I don't feel that it's wrong that I'm here, but but I remember thinking that age, sort of that idea, because it seems like we're in an age where lies are completely okay on so many levels. It's just part of our culture that different forms of lying, and it's even in terms of metaphysics, I would say that's true sometimes.
Well, you bring up a wonderful point that leads us to the enchantment of the internet, enchantment of technology. So enchantment and glamour are a hand-in-hand type of magic. A glamour is you create a look that disguises the truth. So women get plastic surgery, that's a glamour. Women wear makeup, that's a glamour. Men wear makeup, that's a glamour. And so you can use glamour and enchantment for positive or negative, like everything else in the world. You can use an amulet and talisman for positive or negative. Anything can be grabbed onto by any of those polarities. And so that lying is because we have the power of the internet, the power of media. So the enchantment has gone into the negative.
It's true. And glamour can be protective. I remember reading that in The Mists of Avalon. I'd love that word glamour, when Vivian would put on a glamour, And I was like, oh, I love that. And that it can be also an energy that you mask yourself. And that can be a very protective thing. Like in their case, I think Merlin did that too. He wanted to get in somewhere. And I think there's a whole book on that in Alice Bailey's, which I've always wanted to read about glamour. And they were talking about that, even in the early 1900s. So you're right.
But it's always been around. It's always, when we look at shape-shifting deities, we're looking at their glamour. They're shifting into something else. We can't see their true form. So but again, positive or negative, you choose. But it's very interesting. I find it all very interesting if you keep digging and pulling things apart like that.
I think so. And I think the main thing, like any other period of time, is that I always loved that Delphic oracle message, know thyself. And I heard about that when I was very young, and it's been one of my main mottos, even though they had some other ones. I have a little book on that. It was really fascinating. And that idea that if you know yourself and you take the time to really get to know the deeper self, then you can even know if you're being enchanted most of the time. I mean, there are some enchantments for everyone that fool all of us.
Yes. I think I've dated them.
Yes, that is the one area that it's quite powerful. Absolutely. You know,
And I say that with great love and respect.
Well, that's how I feel about my youth. I'm revisiting Sylvia Plath on some level because she was a poet that really affected me when I was young. And so I just found myself going back to my 20s in my mind and that person I was and all the romantic notions and mistakes I made around love. But to be honest, it was my journey and it's okay. It's not, I always tell people love is messy anyway. It's never
supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be. Your heart is supposed to break sloppily open and you're supposed to be all over the place. It's not supposed to be neat and tidy. That's not how it is.
No, it's not pretty.
So going back to your talisman or amulet, you said something very important that can be used for talismanic work, and that is know thyself. You can create a sigil with that.
Oh, I love that. I never thought of doing that. And I just I've always loved that and thought about know thyself.
You can simply write it on a piece of paper with some symbols around it or other axioms or other poems or words or anything else you want to amplify that, but make that your center. And you can even reduce it into sigil magic. So you can take the statement, know thyself, and just on a separate piece of paper, cross out the vowels and then cross out any duplicate consonants. And what you're left with is a magical sigil of that phrase.
Fascinating.
Yes. And then one step further, you can just leave those, linear, like let's say it was YNS. You could leave it like that, or you can create a design of YNS where they're all combined and there's all kinds of glamour and hidden enchantment around it. So even you, when you look at it, it's just going deep into your subconscious.
I'd love that idea. I think I'm going to try that. That's really fun.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
I mean, I love letters and just, lettering itself, calligraphy. And I'm listening to you. It's totally inspiring me to do more with that because I have an affinity towards that anyway. So I think that you're helping to bring a lot of attention to something in a way to me that seems very grounded and experienced.
Wonderful.
And because like I said, when I thought about it, I said, well, I see people, sometimes I'll see the sigils and they look so complicated and you're like, oh, and then when you just described that, I was like, oh, that's so neat. I can do that. That's not so overwhelming esoterically to frighten me away.
No, not at all. There's so many ways to create sigils. I have a whole course on that as well. And sigil magic is also hand in hand with my love of talismans and amulets. And it is the core of my magical workings. I
really never knew that about you. It's amazing. Yeah. Well, you have a lot of depth. It seems like you've been on this journey most of your life, and you're definitely I would say you're a real digger. You really dig into things. You really hunker down and not just, and that you go deeply into the experiences. And that's what I know of you anyway, since I've known you for almost 20 years now, I think.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe that.
Time. That's another topic. Well, we have just a couple minutes, and I was wondering if there's any last sort of things you'd like to say about this topic or advise or just anything on your mind.
Sure. I think some people are going to approach this with trepidation. Oh, I have to know so much. I have to make this a very elaborate. And I'm really fond of simple magic. And so I guide them to just start. There are so many wonderful books on the subject. It's an age-old topic and craft, so you can find it anywhere. You can, it's easy to get your hands on the information. Reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions, but go simply. But, if you're attracted to it, simply go forth.
I love that. And I think that is important because, like I said, it can seem very intimidating with especially some of the sigils you'll see online or in books and things. So thank you again for coming on the show. It was really fascinating. We always have your contact information on our websites. If you want to get a hold of Renee Starr, her website's always on our own Sixth Sense Society website. And you have also a Facebook page, I think, also that people can join too.
Mm-hmm. And all of that's on you can do it on my website.
Great. That's awesome. And thank you all for listening in. I hope you go out and make a talisman or amulet or appreciate the ones that you have after this show. It's certainly been very inspiring for me. But join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a wonderful week.